Welcome, everyone, to our first webinar here at PSG Global Solutions. My name is David Koch. I'm heading the healthcare division here at PSG, and I've joined PSG about 8 years ago, being part of the journey from a small offshore RPO provider to a premier provider for healthcare staffing and hospital systems. I'm joined today by Kim Windsor, who has been a thought leader at AMN and Fastaff and has been a client of PSG in different roles throughout the years. Kim, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. Thanks, David. First, I want to say welcome, everyone, to spending the next hour with us. Hopefully, we'll be able to share some insights that will be valuable to you that you can take forward. I have actually been in the healthcare industry about 45 years now. And to be honest, it took me a little bit by surprise when I was preparing for this because mentally in my brain, I'm still in my 30s. So I don't know how that happened, but it does go to the adage of time flies when you're having fun. To share my experiences at a high level, I started off in the healthcare industry on the acute care side, working in a hospital in Pennsylvania with responsibilities for HR, clinical management, risk management, and did that for a number of years. Then I moved into some consulting relationships with IT firms, technology implementations, government contracting, and auditing. But most recently, since 2005, which is fairly recent, I guess, my responsibilities have been working in large healthcare staffing agencies, looking specifically at the credentialing and operations management within those agencies. So in a nutshell, David, that's where I've been and what I've done.
Wonderful. So we're here today to talk about strategies on how to hire talent below budget within healthcare, and more specifically also in healthcare staffing, which I think is going to be a main focus for today's conversation. It's a big topic for 1 hour, so we try to identify themes that are most relevant and structure them in 3 buckets. One is overcoming common challenges. One is reduced time to hire, and what you can do about it. So we'll try to keep this as an interview style between Kim and I. So Kim is going to talk a lot. I'm just going to ask and moderate with a couple of questions. And we also would like you to participate with your questions. So please use the chat and the FAQ section on the right side of the screen. And depending on how much time Kim and I spend with our fun conversation, we'll have a lot of time or just a little bit of time at the end to go through those questions. I can guarantee you, if we don't get to your question, we will get you an answer and we'll follow up with you after the fact. All right, let's get started. So the first topic we have is overcome common recruiting challenges for healthcare organization. Now, before we talk about recruiting and staffing specifically, I think it's worth talking about the current state within healthcare staffing. You want to share your thoughts around that?
Sure. There definitely, David, are some changes that are happening within the staff care industry. And of course, like everything in the past few years, they're relative to the pandemic, right? It's been so disruptive. But we are currently seeing some shrinkage in the staffing industry at this point. The number of orders that are being opened by hospitals has definitely decreased. Hospitals are using this time to readjust, realign, and even reconsider what their staffing needs are, how they need to fill their vacancies. We actually started to see this decline towards the end of 2022.
Okay, yeah.
Yep. And it has progressed through 2023 and it continues to fall off. This is obviously, we don't have the demand in the hospitals that we did with the pandemic. It is trying to move back to a normal situation. But as I'm talking to people within the industry, yes, they acknowledge that the decline is there, the reason for the decline. But what they're expecting is that as we progress through 2023 and definitely into 2024, we're going to see a rebound in the staffing industry, in the orders that the hospitals are opening as they get back more to normalization. And there is even speculation that the level of orders as they rebound may come in higher than they were at the same time at the pre-pandemic episode. So we're definitely still seeing the decline, but the idea is that that's going to turn around and definitely come back to what we saw a few years ago.
And I think that's in line with what we see with our clients, right? So there are some that are, let's say, ahead of the curve. They're, the orders coming in. Some others are still in the tail end. But overall, I think we see that it's moving in the right direction. So I totally agree. So what do you think is happening within the hospitals now, with these changes?
Well, I really feel bad. Managing hospitals is difficult. I mean, they're very complex organizations, and just trying to figure out what the landscape is going to look like. The analogy that I use, David, it's like putting a puzzle together, but you don't have a picture on the front of the box. So you're doing the best you can to fit what into the solution. And I mean, they've gone through, as a result of the pandemic, consolidation or even elimination of services. The growth of telehealth and virtual medicine. I mean, that was in the beginning, but it just exploded during the pandemic. As a result, there's uncertain volumes, uncertain census in certain areas. Where is the pent-up demand? Where do they have to reallocate to meet that demand?
Right.
And of course, they have the unexpected staff vacancies that we've all gone through with the Great Resignation, with the clinical burnout. So there's numerous factors that are in play that they have to consider. On top of that, hospitals generally have to balance that narrow operating margin. Their expenses need to be very closely controlled. And when you bring in temporary or supplemental staff that's higher than the normal permanent staff, it's very possible to see margin erosion. And that's something that hospitals absolutely have to prevent. So they do have to look at the volume control and the bill rate control. And I think that's all, those are the factors that they're looking at, that they're trying to balance as they determine what is their need going forward.
And I think what's interesting is the trend for telehealth that you mentioned, right? Obviously that came up or was pushed really hard during the pandemic, which obviously makes a lot of sense. But, telemedicine is putting additional strain on the system, right? Because now these nurses and, healthcare providers or, doctors are now part of these telehealth care systems or services and will not be available for the hospital. So there's an additional strain on the system, which, is ironic to a certain sense, right? So let's talk about healthcare staffing and how they're impacted.
Because definitely they're the other partner in this equation, right? You have to work together. And, the staffing firms are really facing a collision of two forces: the significant reduction of orders from the clients in certain areas, and as a result of that, the decreased pressure for lowering bill rates. Right? That's part of the equation. But on the other hand, the clinicians, the healthcare providers, are still expecting a higher pay rate and the multiple order opportunity. They're used to that for the past couple of years. So you have the downward pressure, you have the upward push from the clinicians, and the staffing agencies are really walking a tightrope right now, trying to keep those orders flowing in and continuing to keep the interest in the candidates warm so that as the orders come in, they're able to fill them as efficiently as possible. But the one thing, David, that in these discussions that I haven't brought up and want to take the opportunity is the nursing shortage that we faced pre-pandemic. And it was definitely a factor in how the hospitals ran, how staffing agencies ran, and it hasn't gone away. We know that there is still a nursing shortage. The aging population continues to happen, as I disclosed in my earlier revelation. But all of those factors have to be considered. I was reading an article, as a matter of fact, this weekend from Becker's that said between 2021 and 2031, there is going to be a need for 195,000 nurses to come into the workforce. I don't know about you, but that's a huge number. And we just have to be aware that the aging population, the nursing shortage, are drivers in the background that are influencing a lot of behaviors. And hospitals need to do the best they can to fill their vacancies and keep the staffing levels for safe patient care.
Right. It's interesting that you mentioned this, right? So I think it was a year and a half ago, 2 years, COVID went so fast. I honestly don't remember, but I really enjoy listening to the Daily from the New York Times. It's like a daily podcast that they have. And even they mentioned this. They talked the whole episode about the situation we have with the nurse shortage, right? And essentially the challenges that the system itself has on how we're getting them through training, educate them, and then also them become seasoned, right? Because they're replacing very seasoned nurses, and so there's definitely loss there.
Yes.
It's a big problem that we need to solve for, right? So let's stay a little bit more about this shortage of nurses, right? So how would you say this is impacting the recruiting, specifically in hospitals and the healthcare staffing?
And to be honest, we could do an entire webinar on the nursing shortage, David.
Right.
It is so robust to discuss, and the shortage exists. There's no argument about that, and how hospitals and staffing agencies can deal with that is important. Nursing schools as a whole are not able to produce the graduates that are needed, and that's due to faculty limitations, clinical rotation experiences, and in addition to that, the students that are in the programs may not be in the area where they're needed. I mean, obviously, back to that Becker article, there is different ratios in states that range from 7 clinicians to 1,000 of the state population to 16 nurses per 1,000 capita. So there is even internally within the states not an equal distribution to head count. So when you look at recruitment by staffing agencies, by hospitals, we have to find a way to be able to move nurses to where the demand is. I live in Houston, and if you talk about large healthcare organizations, systems, they're there. I mean, they have unbelievable organizations, and they have a lot of schools, but they are still not able to recruit enough locally, and hospitals have to find ways to recruit broadly so that they can bring nurses into the Houston area to meet the demand that these large organizations. And it really does go to show that being efficient, getting the manpower focused on reaching out to the students, to the nurses that exist, is critical. And that's one of the biggest things I think hospitals and staffing agencies have to face.
And I think it's more than only nurses, right? So about a year ago, I had, I needed to see a doctor, and I'm living here in Los Angeles, right? So we have some beautiful, fantastic hospital systems here, and I tried to schedule an appointment. And I tried to call in, and I was not able to get anyone on the phone. And the only way for me to get an appointment, I kid you not, was go through their app and actually request an appointment with my doctor. My doctor answered because the whole support staff in the clinic was not available. It's crazy, right? It's across the board, and it's not getting easier, I think, right?
Agreed. Things are different now than they used to be.
So how does this shortage, though, impact the day-to-day when you look at a healthcare staffing company, right? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Sure. And I think, day-to-day, the needs are there. But as we mentioned, they're evolving. They're not as predictable as they were. So having the staffing agencies really partner closely with their clients and understand what the clients are going through, what the hospitals need, like you said in your example, the support staff to schedule, to follow up, all this kind of stuff. Really getting close to the clients and understanding what's happening now and where do you see it changing in the upcoming months to year, because it's different. We know that hospitals don't run the same in January as they do in April. The demands change. Everything is different. So really getting to that understanding. But also on the other side of the equation, is there the right clinician mix? And you're right, not just nurses, it's more than that. Is there the right mix of healthcare professionals within that database of the staffing agency so that as these needs come up, we have the supply to fill the orders? Whether it's a technology solution with their CRM or ATS, whether it's, aggressive marketing, regardless, we need to A, find out what the demand is, and then B, build that supply within the database to make sure that the resources are there when and where they're needed. And bottom line, as a staffing agency, are we easy to work with? That doesn't have anything to do with the nursing shortage. It doesn't have to do with
Right.
many other factors, but it is so important. As this is a tight market, we have to make sure that we're easy to work with, that we're not causing frustration on either our client or our clinician's side. So that would be my recommendation.
And you spoke about, having the right pool of people in your database, right? And I think one trend that we've seen over the last couple, I would say 2 quarters or so, is, on one hand, you have the big push to acquire new talent, right? Really going out there in traditional job boards, specific passive sourcing job boards, utilizing posting to really feed their databases to get that talent in there. That's one part. The second part that not many have been working on is really nurturing that talent in their database in a systematic way. It's more than getting a daily email or something. That's not going to work. I signed up for something on LinkedIn, and I've received an average of 4 emails a day to that topic. So way too much, right? So what is the right amount of getting them involved, the balance, keep them engaged in the right way. So I think that's going to be very interesting to see over the upcoming year, I think, for sure.
It's a great point.
It's a lot to unpack, right? And I don't think necessarily that I want to spend the time and talk about recruiting process in a sense, the sourcing piece and all that part of the process, but really look about the cost component, optimizing our support process in regards to speed and cost, right? So how can healthcare staffing companies address this challenge conceptually? How do they go about it?
Well, my first suggestion, honestly, David, is to get into the weeds of the operation. Just dig deep and find out what is it we do on a daily basis, process-wise, procedural-wise. Where is it that the staff is spending, the internal staff is spending the majority of the time, and how can we make those processes more efficient? This will free up the internal talent, the folks that know the business, that have the contacts, and they can really be freed up for the client, the clinician management that is necessary. How can we gain the efficiencies by working faster, having fewer steps in a procedure, having, believe it or not, even more people in the process? You may look at me and say, well, that seems to be counterintuitive, but there are ways, and I'll share some of my experiences where you can actually add people, resources through offshoring, outsourcing to gain more production, more results. A lot of people would say technology, put in technology. That's the answer. And I am not anti-technology by any means. Absolutely, it is a way to solve that. But it takes time, and it also takes money. And I don't know about you, but I've never worked in a place where we could implement technology in less than 12 months. I mean, it's a lot of work to do it right. So do we have that kind of time to say, all right, we're going to bring in this technology to solve that problem? Is that technology even available? We have to do research. So in the meantime, let's take a look. What are those high volume processes? What are the high redundant, repetitive procedures that can be standardized, streamlined, and even outsourced so that we can gain the production that's going to help us move forward and get past this period that we're in?
Right. which is our bread and butter, right? I think if you utilize offshore, you are able, as part of that process, to really streamline and standardize the process, which then will enable you down the road from an automation standpoint as well, right? So I absolutely agree. So, but look, this is a big effort, right? So
Sure.
how would you suggest to go about this? Like, how would you break it down, identify the challenge, and bring improvements quickly?
I think what I would do is break it into two different camps, right? Because there's the front end to staffing and there's the middle to back end, back office of staffing, right? Two different ways to look at it. The first camp that I would call are differentiating competencies, differentiators. These are where we would support the areas that are forward facing. They're the front of the company. These are the folks that interact with the clients, with the clinicians, recruiting, account management, sales. They are really the face of the organization. I mean, for example, recruiters are known for their ability to connect, to reach out, to present opportunities, work to mutual satisfaction, and get nurses matched and on assignment. They have that ability to connect, right? That's their brass ring. That's their claim to fame. But if those recruiters or salespeople, but specifically recruiters, are spending their time going through the database, trying to find the perfect match, wondering if the information is current, are the credentials updated, do we have the most relevant experiences, are the references up to date, that's wasting their valuable time and talent.
Right.
So if you look at that differentiating function, how do you give the recruiters, the sales team, the support to have the data, the candidates at their fingertips? In other words, how can resources be focused to serve up the perfect match? And I would much rather have my recruiters talking to 5 or 10 nurses that could meet and fulfill an order than going through trying to find them. So when we look at that front end, that differentiating, I want to serve candidates to the recruiters on a silver platter and say, work your magic, make it happen, get these nurses to work. So then the other camp that I talked about is if you take a look more at the necessary or maybe what I call foundational competencies, these are the steps that have to happen once that nurse is identified, once the match is made. What are the competencies that will help get that nurse ready, get that nurse on assignment, and actually pay the nurse and evaluate the nurse at the end of the assignment? So everything, what I like to call from mid to back office functioning, how can we look at the high volume, the high redundancy, the repetitive nature, and get some support there? And to be honest, David, this is the example. This is how I got to know PSG. To be honest with you, right here is the perfect attestation to how my relationship with PSG started. The company I was working for had high demand. There was a lot of nurses needing to be started. And quite honestly, the credentialing function, specifically document management, was a bear. I mean, there was a lot of documents to process. They took time. It was taking the valuable internal resources away from the client management, the interactions, by trying to process through this. So I took a look and said, how can I do this? Yes, I can hire more people internally, drive up the cost. Yes, it's SG&A. We all understand that. And I could do that. But I started again, like I said, to do some research, and I found the concept of offshoring. And it was just so interesting. It was not really heard of at the time in our industry. And as I looked at different potential partners, I started to talk more and more with PSG as they really were open to this idea, this concept. PSG was very strong in the recruitment side of the industry, but they embraced the solution and looking into document management. So we identified the opportunity mutually. We went through the training. We set up SLAs, looked at performance. And you know what? We were able to start more than twice the number of nurses for the exact same cost. I was able to increase the workforce processing documents, but not increase my cost, and push more nurses through and get them credentialed. That gave us, our internal experts, the time to focus on the critical thinking, the management that was needed, because we could run this engine 24/7, 365. Right. The speed, the RPMs, if you will, just went through the roof. So there's my example of what can happen.
And when I introduced you as a thoughtful leader, right? And I think this is, coming back to it, right? You were one of the first who started this with us. And if you think about it, we now have standardized processes. We have dedicated teams just doing that. And, it's one of the core offerings that we're providing today. And so, I think you were one of the first. And I think at this point, we are best practice. So really, it was a long journey. And, you are to thank to part of it. So thank you.
Well, and congratulations to PSG for grabbing a hold of it and running with it, because I'm telling you, right. it was a great partnership and continues to be.
Thank you. So I agree with your concept, right? Where you say like you have the core competency, really the differentiator, and you have the foundational competencies, right? Let's use a little bit more time and talk about this, right? Like, what are some examples for hospitals, maybe? What are some examples of hospital on how they could, with that concept in mind, translate that to their operation?
Sure. And hospitals, again, not necessarily the focus of this, but they are a partner. Right. They are part of the equation, as we mentioned. And I think when you look at hospitals, how can they step in and revolutionize and make it easier? One of the things, honestly, is to lower the hurdles. Right. Sometimes it's very difficult to get temporary supplemental staff into hospitals. And believe me, I'm a clinician. I support quality, and I know that we need to have the right people in the right jobs. 1,000%. But when you're looking at temporary staff, when you're looking at supplemental resources, they don't necessarily have to jump through every single hurdle that a permanent full-time employee has. And I know a lot of times people say, well, join commission. And yes, that's very important. It's a quality standard. But it's also important for hospitals to take a look and really critically evaluate what's necessary and what's not to maintain the quality. And I think when hospitals do that, they will find that there's ways to simplify the requirements and not make it such a huge stretch. So that's one thing. I also think hospitals need to work closely with their vendors, as we mentioned, and hold them accountable. Are there business reviews? Are the SLAs being met? The staffing agencies, like we said, need to understand what the hospital is going through, and they need to be able to deliver on those goals. One thing that staffing agencies can do to help hospitals, if hospitals are open to it, is taking on a little bit more of the process. So are the staffing agencies able to do interviewing? Are they able to do a little bit more of the selection process of the clinicians and not having to burden the hospital staff in making appointments, doing interviews, follow-ups, that kind of thing? So there's a few things hospitals can do off the top of my mind, and that would be what I would identify.
And I think that's an interesting thought, right? Because as you said before, it's the cost situation that everybody has, right? The hospital have a cost pressure, right? At the same time, the staffing costs are still very high. And so that's also a way to reduce costs, right? Let's take over some part of the process. I think that's definitely a very interesting thought around this. Let's talk about, for staffing agencies, right? So we talked about hospital, let's talk about staffing agency in that context.
In that context, for staffing agencies, again, just to reiterate, you really need to know your clients well. You need to understand their staffing needs, their philosophy of hiring, what success looks like, what are their needs now, and what's coming in the future. Again, you're developing a relationship. Staffing agencies are managing a very important function because those jobs need to be filled. There needs to be clinicians at the bedside. So in order to do that, you really need to manage your talent at every stage. Right. And I think, we've talked about technology, but it's important for staffing agencies not to lose their talent and look at the different phases when the applicants are looking at the jobs posted, when they're doing their pre-application or they're going through their application. How can we touch them early? Now, I know that the chat functions are huge, and there's always the bot that comes up and says, do you have any questions? Yeah, you're looking at jobs. What can I answer for you? And that's a great way to use technology. I will tell you, in the past, we have done that with people, where once that nurse hits the submit button, within 10 to 15 minutes, a phone call was placed. And the nurses were like, wow, I just hit that button, and now you're calling me to find out what I need. It's that connection. Right. I think I've said to you before, David, nurses are people that care for other people. We love it when people care for us and want to find out what we need. So that wow factor was we got so much positive feedback. So that's the application process. But then
just very quickly, I think it's a very good point, right? Because some clients I talk to, and I ask them, like, how long does it take you to actually respond to an applicant? They get quiet really quickly and they don't have a good answer. And then sometimes they come back to me and say, actually, it takes us up to 2 days to respond to an applicant. And guess what? It obviously has an impact on the conversion, right? What you mentioned, the 10, 15 minutes, we call it rapid response, right? Where and we have seen that the connect rate drops significantly between 15 and 30 minutes, and after 30 to 45 minutes. So you can see, like, within the first hour, how the connect rate already drops significantly. And after an hour, it's drastic, right? So having this in place, I think, is a huge opportunity for a lot of our clients, for sure. Yeah.
That's a great point, because once I hit submit, I'm probably going to go on to other things that I have to do on my to-do list.
That's right.
I'm not going to answer the phone for somebody, an hour later or 2 days later. You're exactly right.
But I interrupted your flow, right? So we talked about applicants. I think the next you wanted to talk about was highest per start, I think.
Right. And thank you, David. I was caught up in the moment. We don't want to lose them while they're applying, but you know what? As they're moving through the process, we don't want to lose our clinicians either. And sometimes that process takes time, right? We have to find the right job. We have to go through the interviews. There's credentialing, there's referencing, there's many steps. Let's not lose them while they're going through the process, staying in touch. I do respect your point about balance. We don't want to overload them. We don't want to inundate them with texts and emails, but we also want to make sure that they're engaged and that we know what's important. If they're having any issues, we want to make sure we don't lose them as they're going through the process. And also when they get on assignment. And if you look at the staffing scenario, these are clinicians that are uprooted from their home for a period of time and living in a strange environment, working in a new organization. It's nice to have people reach out. How are things going? Are there any issues can we help you with? What are you looking for next? Did this work for you? Would you like something different? I kind of look at it almost, I don't know, a guidance counselor, a career coach, just continuing that contact so that the nurse understands they're more than just a widget. They are an important asset to the company, and we care about them. So again, let's be easy to work with. Let's make sure we can reach out and find out what's important to them and what their needs are. So I think those are all things that staffing agencies should consider as they're working through these processes.
And I think there's a certain limit for technology, right? For that piece of it, right? So a good example of a fantastic recruiter, we worked with was, she knew for every one of their nurses she had on assignment, essentially a lot about them. Like, she knew, like, one nurse wanted to spend Thanksgiving in Florida. That's where she always went for Thanksgiving. And then Christmas, she was home in Montana with her family, right? So she worked around that, and you offered her opportunities in Florida and in Montana around that time, right? So that's how you build a relationship. that's how you keep them going,
Exactly.
So I agree 100%. And when you try to automate that, there's going to be a natural limit. Yeah.
Agreed. That's a great example.
Okay, let's move on to our second topic, reduce time to hire, right? While we still try to attract the high caliber candidates, right? And I think it resonates with everyone who is working recruiting, that when you talk about, time, you want to reduce the time to hire, like everybody, obviously, right? We want to do this. But if you think about it in reality, there are a lot of delays within the process.
Sure.
And these can be different reasons. It can be because the vendors you're using for background checks or whatnot have an SLA that is longer than you want it to be for getting them on assignment, or lab work. That has been a big pain point, I think, over the last 6 to 9 months. So how can healthcare staffing companies effectively address these delays in the process, right? Because it's one thing designing a good process or a quick process, and it's another to really execute it and maintaining it.
Yes. And, I did express a few examples. David, you shared some too, and they definitely apply, right? Taking a look at, the payroll or the document management, whatever. Those are definitely areas to look at. But you're right, there's more. I think it's important to know that every staffing company has their own process. They have their own tools. Their roles are different, how they're involved in the process. But it's still important to peel apart and find out what the steps are, and look to find resources such as PSG that can handle those high volume, foundational, but repetitive processes as early and as efficient as possible. So don't just stop at the first pass, and look to find ways to expand the focus. So if we look at that document management example, we had success. It was great. But then let's expand the scope to the next level. You mentioned drug screens, background checks, references, setting up payroll. What are the other necessary steps that have to happen to get the nurse to the assignment? Is it an agency that does travel? Is it an agency that does housing? What's involved in that? What research is necessary? What communication? How do you set up payroll? How do we make sure that the information in the finance system is correct? So don't just stop. Expand the scope is what I'm trying to say, so that, again, your internal experts are getting the clinician served up to them. Everything is ready when they go in and they look at their requirements. Everything is there. They just have to look and say, yes, final review, it's good, we can deliver the nurse. Now, your point about SLAs is perfect. I can't tell you the number of times there's been changes put in place and you walk away and then you come back 6 months and say, well, geez, why didn't anything change? Why don't we have better outcomes? Well, you have to measure to find out if you're successful. Sometimes the ideas you put in place are good, but they don't necessarily present the results that you were hoping for. So the idea of establishing SLAs and being very clear with your partners, such as PSG, is important. We used to have regular, and I mean in the beginning, weekly meetings just to find out, how are things working? Were our assumptions correct? Did we put the right steps in place? And PSG participated equally with us in that analysis. And it was very, very helpful because it gave us the data to continually improve and find new opportunities. Because in this world of staffing, everything is integrated with everything else. If a step changes in the front part of a process, it's going to have a trickle effect through the end stage of the process. So my recommendation is look at SLAs, establish them, and whatever gets monitored gets done, I think, is one of the other analogies that I've run into over the years.
I think there are people agreeing with us because I saw some hearts flying above the screen. So I assume it's a feature and not that my computer is broken. But yeah, joke aside, right? So what are open questions that, our audience can ask themselves to really identify if their process is working or not.
So when you talk about questions, like you're talking about what roles does tech play in
No, like for instance, one thing that comes to mind is, fallout rate, right? So you hired someone, and what's the fallout rate to start, right? So that's, I think, a good indicator. Do you have some other that you would think of you can share with the audience?
Sure, and that's the beauty of breaking down processes and procedures. Is each step or each individual process can be monitored, can have an SLA. So yes, what is your fallout rate? If you go right back to the application process, how many applicants completed their application? How many didn't? How long did it take? How many of those applications moved to filling a job? How long did it take? Once they were matched, how long did it take to get them credentialed? Did they drop out? Were they not able to be credentialed, and did it end up in a cancellation or a postponement? How many calls did it take to get references completed? How long did it take? Were there payroll errors? Did we have missing information in our payroll data? I mean, every single segment of the processes can be measured. Now, you can get into, data paralysis if you're crazy. But again, like I said, every agency is different, but you need to find out and set your goals appropriately. Where are our biggest slowdowns at? So let's focus on those. Let's set the SLAs, and if it is getting nurses matched to an assignment, why is that? Is it because we need more front-end support, getting the data into the database so that the recruiters can have that volume of nurses that they need to close the deal?
I think those are some great thoughts, right? So what comes to mind is one example was that one of our clients decided, and this is many, many moons ago, to automate completely their referencing process.
Yeah.
And so we were owning that process, and we had the data. We knew exactly how long it takes, and completion rate, and all of this. And then, that was completely automated. And the client came back after a couple of weeks because they didn't get any references done, right? Because the way the automation works, it sends an email, right? So you have to put in the name, who is going to give you the reference, and then they're going to be automatically engaged, right? And so if nobody is responding to that, then you're not going to have a reference, right? So that was a big issue, and they started optimizing the process, and it turned out to become a combined effort, right? Where the first reach out was done by automation, and then our team was doing the follow-ups. And that way, you're able to, optimize and whatnot. In this case, we actually ended up going back to fully PSG owning the process because we were about 25% cheaper than with the automation. Because keep in mind, you always pay license fees, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a great example, right? And if you think about the credentialing process as well, right? Like, it requires a lot of follow-ups, and you have to be persistent. And if you don't have the manpower to do it, you're going to have a fallout way too much.
That's a very good point.
So, which is the perfect segue, which is let's talk about technology, right? So what does technology play in overcoming these challenges that we talked about? We gave a couple examples, right? But other specific technologies or tools that you would recommend implementing?
Well, I think the technology for the front end, as we've talked about, the CRMs, ATS technology, really is, and I'm not talking about any of the proprietary solutions that
right.
staffing agencies may have. I'm talking more of the, like you said, the commercial. It's all front end. It works really well. I mean, it collects the clinician information, can work to provide some of the matches. So it does work well for the front end, and you can use the automation to reach out and do those little nudges, if you will, the little reminders, connecting to them when it's critical. Yeah. But the thing that it doesn't do is, at least in my experience, is the updating, keeping the information current. So if the nurse works an assignment, how well is that data updated in the ATS so that experience builds to make better recommendation, better choices going forward. It's that, is it real? Is it living? Is it breathing? And I think that's probably one of the challenges from the front end. I think that there is also, it's funny, has nothing to do with staffing, but here's an opportunity that I think could help on the front end. For anybody who's ever flown United, and I'm not promoting one airline over another, but my last United flight was like a light went off. I booked the flight, then I started getting texts or emails that said, your flight is in so many days. Have you done this? Are you ready for this? The day of my trip, I got an email saying, you really should be leaving now for the airport because the boarding process the security process is taking X number of hours. I get there, I go through security. Here's your gate number. Oh, sorry, your gate number has changed. We'll be boarding in 30 minutes. Whatever. It's that real-time process notification. So it's that way of engaging without being overwhelming. And it's kind of like being a buddy to the clinician. How can we use this technology to help them move through the process? We see that your interview was set up with the client. We should have information back to you within 2 days. Your client has accepted this. Now we need to do this. Just staging out the process and communicating it through technology. It's kind of, like I said, being a buddy, holding the hand and helping get through some of these challenges to get started.
I like that example. However, I think staffing specifically is even more complex, right? Because in your case, you wanted to fly somewhere, you were getting ready, you knew the schedule, right? So this was like complementing your process in a way, right? It helped you to get where you wanted to be. Whereas in staffing, these nurses are on assignment and they might be working night shift or day shift. They don't necessarily care right now at this moment for the next assignment. So it's much harder to actually have that relevance in that moment in time and get the response, right? But I agree, like having something like that figured out would be fantastic.
It would. And your point, David, about the 24/7, if a nurse is working 3 a.m., I can't call her,
right,
and talk to her about her next assignment, but I could maybe send an automated text, maybe, or some kind of communication to let her know that, yep, we're still thinking about you and you're a priority. But you're right. It's a very good point.
One of our clients is, I think, a little bit more innovative than maybe others in that regard. So what they're testing with us right now is they have a database of nurses that opted in to be contacted during the night.
Oh.
And so we have a recruiting team that is actually reaching out to these individuals during the night. Right? It's a 24/7 operation over in the Philippines, right? So we can actually reach out to the time that they want. So really bridging that gap, I think is going to be very interesting and might actually lead to some very interesting results.
That's fantastic. That's great. And again, the 24/7 is a very valuable aspect.
I agree. So we talked about specific technologies, right? In the front end, I would love to talk a little about the back end, how you framed it, right? So maybe we can do that. And, what are like trends as well, right? And again, the focus, I think, is time to hire and make it more efficient, right?
Exactly. And I think, in talking about the technology and the front end solutions that are off the shelf, they are well developed. They really are. But there seems to be, and again, I'm only speaking from my experiences, and I'm not talking about the proprietary, but when you look at implementing some of these off the shelf solutions, they really come up short once you start hitting the credentialing, the referencing, the testing, the examinations. They don't have it built in where they can link what the client needs, what the staffing agency needs with what the nurse has. And how do they have that robust library, if you will, to streamline what the credentialing team or what the payroll team needs in order to do their job. From my experience right now, there still is a huge need for people to get into these mid to back office processes. Even if you think about it, David, with technology, and you look at document management, you can automate and you can continue to improve, which I know it will happen, but there is always that need for the human touch, for, if you will, an auditing function, a final review function, making sure that there's not a falsified record, a falsified signature, making sure that, yes, this green light is truly a green light. So what I'm seeing is that the automation, the technology in the mid to back offices is just not there yet. The integrations aren't ready. The interpretation isn't ready. So it's a perfect opportunity. Like I said, let's look at what the processes are. Let's figure out the efficient solution. And while we're doing that, let's put the manpower in place so that we can turn up the volume, turn up the RPMs, and then bring in the automation once it's ready, once we know what the best practice is, and automate it. And from what I understand, I think there are vendors out there, perhaps PSG is one of them, that can even help with that automation, so that, again, it's not the drain on the internal resources. It can be supported externally.
Yeah, so we actually are investing in that, right? We're using RPAs to automate some of those processes. But to your point, right, there is the human component of it. Just imagine, right, during COVID, where the COVID vaccination was critical.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Right, and how much fraud that was attempted during that time. Like, just imagine there is a system trying to do that. Like, the human component is important. Let's just say that way, right?
It can't be replaced all the way.
Right. So, which brings me to the last topic. And we're, it's 9 minutes left. So I think timing is perfect. The last topic is really takeaways, right? What our clients can do. And, I don't want you to summarize all of what you share with us, but rather ask you, some guiding thoughts. And if I think about it, it's almost summarizing a little bit, maybe, right? But like giving some guiding thoughts on how to go from here. How should they look at their recruiting process if they think they want to improve, or if they want to identify if they need to improve?
Right. And just to be a nudge about semantics, recruiting and operations.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
I don't want anybody to think.
No, you're right.
Doing the whole landscape. But the first thing I would say, David, is challenge the status quo. Do not be afraid to change. I can't tell you how many times I've heard the words, but we've always done it that way. Yes, you have. And you will continue to have the same challenges that you've always had. What is the definition of insanity that we've all heard? Doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different outcomes, right? That's the definition of insanity. So dig into those processes, challenge the way it's been done, and don't be afraid of change. Right. Along with that, use the data. Use the SLAs, some of the things that we've talked about, the different segments in the process, the high volume, the repetitive. How can we move those faster? Let's use the data. Let's set goals and meet them. And if we're not, let's introduce change again and figure out what's important. I mean, a couple decades ago, the mantra was continuous improvement. Always look to improve. And you find a perfect solution as you iterate and try new things. Plan, do, study, act, PDSA, it works. It's proven, it's successful. So don't walk away from it. Make sure that you're introducing change and you're measuring the outcome of that change. Like I mentioned, we have to be more efficient. We have to look at our redundant processes. How can we do that to speed up? Yes. Can we bring in manpower that doesn't break the budget? You betcha, we can. And we can do these processes 24/7, 365, holidays, pre-holidays, weekends, you name it. It's a matter of finding a partner that's flexible and creative.
Good point, right? Because what I've seen is clients who, you brought document processing as an example, right? That have an internal SLA that they want to get it done within a day, right? Monday through Friday. Guess what? Speed is of essence right now. There are less orders, right? Exactly. It's a tight market. if you're retaining those SLAs, you're not going to be competitive. Some of our clients converted to a 1 to 2 hour SLA, not
Wow.
24 hours, and 7 days a week.
Very
You
impressive.
will not be able to do that onshore. You need to use, an offshore provider, to be able to do that, right?
And it's very true. And the thing that I always loved is, the team that worked days in Manila got everything ready for our day shift when they came in, because of their days was our nights. So as your day shift worked and finished things up, it was ready for our day shift. So it was just on the table, ready for our team coming in. It was a really good handoff.
Well, Kim, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, as always, right? I appreciate you sharing your knowledge and experience with me and the audience. I hope that everyone in the audience who joined us, enjoyed the conversation, took something away, some, food of thoughts. And I think we have a couple questions that came in. I don't think we're going to be able, maybe we can do one. What do you think, Kim?
I'll try and not run at the mouth. I'll try and be brief.
All right. So there's one. So the first one popped already up. So maybe we can take this one question, and then we will take all the other questions, and we will get you answers offline. Okay. So the first question: how can hospitals manage their cost in the recruiting process?
And we didn't talk a whole lot about that, so I'm really glad somebody brought that question up. One of the things in the recruiting process is RPOs, recruitment process outsourcing. And if you look at, like we talked about, unexpected vacancies that these hospitals are having and the resources within their HR teams to do the recruiting, I mean, it's tough work. There's a diverse number of positions that have to be researched and limited number of recruitment resources. So it really bogs down the ability to fill those vacancies quickly. And I'm talking about permanent vacancies, not just the staffing agent vacancies. So using outsourcing, offshoring to build up that recruitment engine so that we have a team of people that can look across the United States, can look very broadly and find the speech pathologist, the registered nurse, the respiratory therapist, the lab technician, you name it, the list goes on and on. It really is a huge support for hospitals. And even for the staffing agencies that dabble in RPO, get that engine behind you to bring the candidates forward. We spent a lot about time talking about staffing agencies, AKA temporary, but there is a huge, huge demand for permanent recruitment outsourcing.
Yeah. We actually have seen quite a few clients who are now in the process building up RPOs.
Okay.
I mean, we have our own, obviously, but a lot of our clients that have been purely doing staffing are now building up that engine because they have the talent access, right? Yeah. They have the access to the hospitals. It's a natural progression, and it makes totally sense in the context in which we're in right now. Definitely, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how that is going to change the industry, and hopefully leading to much more hires, and the healthcare system is not more strains than it is already, right? So
we're all about
thank you. I know. Thank you so much once again. And maybe for everyone in the audience, we have 2 minutes left. I don't want to push it, so we're not going to do another question. Again, we will respond to those offline. In the meantime, if you would love or like to discuss any other topics with either Kim or myself, please reach out. Our, I think, email addresses will be shared as part of this, as well as LinkedIn. Let's use and connect on LinkedIn. And it was a pleasure, again, talking to you, Kim. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I wish you all a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, David, and thank you, everyone who's joined the call.
Thank you.